what inspired you to do this particular piece?
Well, I got a call from Stephanie Turnham, the director of the museum, and she knew that I was a sculptor and I live in Salado.
Mm-hmm.
And she also knew I was a history buff. So she asked if I would be interested in that, and she said, come up with some ideas, and called her back. So that's when I started my research, and that's the reason I came.
Cool, okay. How exactly did you make this sculpture? Like how did you attach the bronze plates, and how did you sculpt the bronze plates?
As I indicated earlier, I actually took a column that was the same size, and any time you attach clay, or you start with an armature. An armature is like the bones in the body, and you're building the flesh to those bones with clay. So I actually took a column. After we approved the design, I took a column, and as I said, I knew I couldn't go up and down a ladder all the time to 18 feet, so I cut it in half, and that way I was able to stand on the floor most of the time, and I worked on the bottom half and then on the top half, and I would actually form the panels to that armature. And so when I finished it, I had 18 clay panels around that column, and they're numbered.
Okay, that's pretty cool. All right. How much time did you spend studying about the Chisholm Trail before you started this piece?
Probably about a month. My wife found a book on Amazon.com. It's an antique book, and it's called The Chisholm Trail, and it was written by a lawyer that had spent time on the Chisholm Trail as a boy, and the book was published in 1939. And so that became my primary source for documentation. As I explained too, I varied a little bit historically, like I mentioned, a one-eyed Jack. Well, I just did that as I enjoy a good sense of humor, and but each panel does represent an event on the Chisholm Trail, like one-eyed Jack's a roper.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. How long exactly did it take you to complete?
I worked on it a full year.
A full year?
As I said, I knew that I had to be in the foundry, and the foundry has a studio that sculptors can come and they can work on their piece, and then they get a feel for what it takes to make the mold and what it's going to do to cast it, and because they're going to do the finished product. The sculptor mainly does the clay, and then a foundry does all the metal work. And they have guys in asbestos suits with helmets on that are out there near the fire and melting bronze and melting the wax out of the cavity, the ceramic shell. So they're there, and I just moved into their studio, and I was up there about a year in Lubbock. I moved from Salado to Lubbock for about a year.
Okay.
Well, and I'd always drawn ever since I was a little bitty kid. My uncle, I remember my first drawing. My uncle drew a P-38 tiger, an airplane, with a tiger's teeth up on the fuselage. And I looked at that and I thought, that really looked neat. I think I was fascinated with the pencil on the paper. So I laid down on my grandmother's floor and I copied that thing over and over until I got it just exactly like it. And I always, I did that, and I'd drawn, but I never did any sculpture. And in college, my major was all-level art education, and I could teach from art from grade 1 through grade 12. I've never taught, but anyhow, that was the degree I ended up with. And then I did my master's in television.
Okay.
And so, but I've just always been drawn to art, and so I started. My first bronze piece was Serena, that was in the creek. That's in the Salado Creek, and it's the Mermaid Serena, and that was my first bronze piece in 1984.
Cool. Are you happy with the final product?
I am. I really am.
You're very happy.
You know, it worked, and fortunately all of our concepts worked. Of course, the foundry, when I was doing it, they would come out there and say, "Ooh, you know, we've never done one like this," and that was encouraging to me because I didn't want anybody to do another one like that. You know? Yeah, the height of it, and just the endurance to do so many panels within a, you know, I gave myself time, you know, and what happens is in art, when you start a project, you have a concept in mind, but then it will take a life of its own on. And if you're lucky, you give in to that life. It's saying, hey, I kind of want to go this direction because something's telling you. So that's what I did. It took a life of its own on, even with my planning. And like extending the panels out from the column, that helped us in being able to create a mold and to be able to attach them correctly. So things like that.
Why did you choose to use bronze?
Well, that's the medium I work in, and I knew it was going to be an outside piece, and bronze won't rust. Bronze doesn't rust. It's composed of 95% copper and 5% tin, and they're combined like an aggregate metal, and it doesn't rust. And there's the Bronze Age. They still find little artifacts that have been buried for hundreds of years, and they come out and they're still recognizable.
Specific one.
Charge more money.
Charge more money.
I think I made 50 cents an hour before it was over with.
What was your favorite part of the sculpture?
The research and being able to actually do cowboys as they really were, because, you know, I relied a lot on photographs that were taken like in the 1880s. You know, photography actually started in the Civil War. You know, Matthew Brady was the first photographer that did war pictures, and they were on a glass negative and a big bulky camera, and he had to put a thing over his head and all that. So they actually had quite a few pictures of cowboys in action. And like I said, you know, the hat came from a sombrero, a Mexican sombrero, and not the ones that you see now, but more they were to protect from the sun. And their uniform was very functional. I call it a uniform, but their costume that they wore. And you know, it's an interesting thing on their cowboy boots. Cowboy was a vain individual, and he wanted to distinguish himself from the farmer. Farmer wore round-toed shoes or round-toed boots. Well, the cowboy had a pointed toe on his, and he would pay maybe, you know, a month's salary for a pair of custom boots, and he wanted them tight because it showed that he had a small foot. I thought, boy, that's really being vain.
Why did you choose the Chisholm Trail to study?
Well, it's the most probably known trail in American folklore of the cattle drive. You know, there are other trails, and like I said, part of the Chisholm Trail originally was called the Trader's Trail, that had been explored or used by Jesse Chisholm. And a lot of people, you know, confuse it with John Chisholm, that their names are spelled differently. And but it was the primary trail probably in America. You know, I mean, a lot, you know, through a lot of westerns. Well, we're taking cattle, and all of them went up the Chisholm Trail. And it was just like an expressway, you know, for cattle. You know, so.
Well, thanks for letting us interview you.
Well, thank you all for having interest in the art and history and all that.